Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today I'm very excited to talk with none other than Xinshu Dong. He is the CEO of Zilliqa, a very exciting company that's leading the way with scaling solutions. Welcome so much to the channel, Xinshu.
Hello, Brad. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm also very excited to start the conversation on Zilliqa and many other things.
We are excited to have you on, and we can't wait to find out about specifically scaling solutions. So let's get stuck into it. Firstly, Xinshu, the title on your website, or the slogan, is the next generation of high throughput blockchain platforms. So without further ado, let's get into what you mean by the next generation. And what's high throughput? Why are these two things so important?
Next generation really just mentions the vision we have for this Zilliqa platform. So as we are seeing on today's blockchain platforms, they are very good. They are supporting many interesting applications that were never possible before. But if you look at the sort of scalability or the throughput aspects of that, they can process about 10 transactions or slightly higher than that every second. So that is something we want to address. And we do believe that if we can increase the throughput by a very large factor, something like, if we can process thousands of transactions, we'll see a revolution in terms of what kind of apps that can run on the blockchain. So that's our vision. That's next generation. That's about supporting high throughput dApps.
Okay, so your focus is on essentially the scalability, and we're going to talk about later in the discussion about how far along you are in achieving that in comparison to things like Visa. But if we want to talk about specifically the blockchain platform, can you just make it really clear what you mean by a blockchain platform? Because some people misperceive you as a protocol, as solely an interoperable protocol or something. We want to make it clear now what you actually are in the context
Yeah,
of blockchain.
I understand. I would say Zilliqa is not just one protocol. It could be a suite of protocols that will make a complete blockchain. So when we say it's a blockchain platform, that means it's really an infrastructure layer where people can build decentralized apps on top of that. So yeah, it's indeed a platform.
Okay, so in that respect, we hear the buzzword of main chain to reflect any platform that will house or append dApps onto that ecosystem. So would it be fair in saying that you could be also considered in that space as an ecosystem where it can house, enterprise, it can house business, it can house, smart contracts?
Yes, exactly. Although, this term main chain is very interesting because you you don't need a main chain unless you are talking about off chain or side chains. But yes, we are sort of a main chain.
Right, okay, that's interesting. So if we talk about specifics now, let's get into the consensus. Can you talk us through, in a nutshell, the fundamentals of your consensus and what sets it apart from the proof of work and proof of stake models as a consensus algorithm?
The consensus algorithm is the one that will try to get most of the nodes agree on the next transaction or the next set of transactions. So there are different ways to do that. As you said, you could use proof of stake or proof of work. We choose something like practical presenting fault tolerance protocol in our consensus. Of course, it's not exactly that, but that's the high level idea. Practical presenting fault tolerance. Usually people refer to it as PBFT, has a very nice feature, which is finality. That means once all the nodes running on this PBFT agree on the next transaction or the next set of transactions, they're done. They are final. So there's no way some nodes or even a majority of nodes can say, okay, sorry, one of the transactions we just proposed was actually wrong. We want to override it. That's not going to happen,
right.
Not with any probability. So that's nice. PBFT has one weakness, which means when you have larger and larger networks, the performance of PBFT degrades. So, with a 50 node network, you could perform, let's say, thousands of transactions a second. But then if you are on 500 nodes, the throughput will be much lower.
Okay.
So that is something we had to sort of improve significantly with the new technology called multi-signature or co-signature. And then again, multi-sig has some security implications when it is deployed in a more hostile environment. And the public blockchain is a very hostile environment. You have to assume any single node can be malicious.
Right.
So that are some of the things we had to take care of in Zilliqa.
Okay, and in that respect also, can we address the proof of work nature of Zilliqa? Because there is a small component that addresses the attacks that happen. Can we talk about that in the context so that we clarify its role?
If you look at the PBFT-based consensus protocol in Zilliqa, so basically each PBFT sort of group is running inside one group or one shard.
Mm-hmm.
And then POW is really the means to answer the question, how do you divide nodes into shards in the first place? Because only after you can divide nodes into shards, then you can run PBFT in each shard. There are many ways to divide nodes. You can just, say, appoint one node. That guy is the supervisor. That guy decides which node goes to which shard. And then you can have, a few nodes, let's say 10 fixed nodes to do that. The way we are doing it in Zilliqa is the opposite, because we don't want to appoint any node or any set of nodes. That has some implication in terms of decentralization or security. We want to do it in a very, very secure manner. So that means it's very difficult for attackers to manipulate this sort of sharding process itself. So that's why we chose POW, proof of work. That means everyone can try to be part of this decision-making process by winning a proof of work. And then if you're lucky, you get into this process before others, you'll be inside that special committee. That special committee is called Directory Service Committee, which determines which node goes where, things like that.
Right, so it's another layer of security almost built into the blockchain. I like the fact that you're also leading the way with your Byzantine fault tolerance, because as we look into blockchains of this generation, Generation 3 and beyond, many of them are actually leading in this way. So it's interesting that you do also have that. If we can talk about a bit of the background of the naming itself and also the evolution since 2015. My understanding is that the name came from silicon. Is that right?
That is correct.
So can you explain a little bit why, the reason behind that, and also the evolutions from the very first white papers that evolved very quickly about where Zilliqa started?
The name actually just started last year. So it's about silica or silicon that power the computing industry. So our vision is Zilliqa as a platform will empower the high throughput apps on blockchain.
Okay.
Of course, it was a very serious discussion of team meetings, so we made that decision. Yeah, I still like that name.
Okay.
On the other hand, the technology started before that. So in 2015, there was a research paper written by Loi Lu, CEO of Kyber, and his PhD advisor, Pratik Saxena, of course, with many other people. So at that time, the paper was the first one that discussed how can you use something called sharding to improve the scalability of a public blockchain. And then Pratik Saxena and another two gentlemen, Max Cantalier and Juzam Motiwala, they founded a company. This company specializes in commercializing this scalable blockchain technology for customers. We had interesting use cases for exchange and a few banks for securities trading. And then we also had some other use cases in different sectors. But that's where we started to sort of commercialize and experiment with this technology in real-world settings. But over time, then in the permissioned blockchain deployments, we only had 30 or 50 nodes. So that's not enough. That's not enough to manifest the potential of our scalable blockchain technology. So that's when we really started to think very hard. How can we get more nodes? How can we get more nodes so that we can get higher throughput?
Right.
Because our technology shows that the more nodes you have, the higher throughput you achieve. So then, the only way out we thought about was doing a public blockchain.
Okay.
Then with a very proper incentive structure to encourage people to volunteer their nodes joining this network, you can have a sizable network to get a very good throughput. Okay,
and if we want to address this a bit further, what we're seeing currently is the establishment of public blockchains. You can see that around the world with many significant public blockchains like Ethereum, like Neo as examples. What you're obviously trying to do is improve the high throughput now through the blockchain arena. But let's talk about two things. That your previous experience in enterprise, clearly you've had a significant amount of, even down to contracts, down to engagements with real world companies. How are you planning on bringing those enterprise markets into the public blockchain space once you establish higher throughput? How is that going to happen?
So there are always two possibilities. Maybe there are more, but to simplify, there are two possibilities. One thing you can do is always to say someone else other than Zilliqa, or maybe Zilliqa itself in future, to adapt our public blockchain code base into a permission blockchain setting.
Okay.
So that means you may probably want to remove, let's say, POW because you just don't need it. In a permission setting, you can assume more trust. And then you may want to add in some additional functions for information control or privacy, things like that. So that's always one general direction. Another possibility is you can also build in some of the required, let's say, information privacy mechanisms onto the public blockchain itself. And then people can leverage the public blockchain. So there are pros and cons, right? In the first approach, with a permission blockchain setting, you can have more flexibility in terms of customization. But then again, you have to pay for the infrastructure you have to run, you have maintain. And then in the second case, you can leverage on something already there. It's just a public blockchain, you don't need to worry about miners because that's something Zilliqa, we ourselves will mine.
Right.
As a business, you just develop on that, develop on something that's already in existence. And then it can also encourage interoperability between different dApps. Developed by different enterprises. You can easily create a marketplace, not just your own business. So that's something I see as very interesting.
Yes.
Of course, there's there are also other opportunities. For example, how do we design a very refined model to sort of have a hybrid model where some of the transactions are mainly on the public blockchain and some of the transactions are mainly on your private blockchain. And then how do you integrate both of them?
I see. And that's interesting because that's what we're seeing unfold with many blockchains right now. We're seeing a bifurcation even down to protocols, whereby some of them are actually on-selling their protocol in the enterprise market. So that's something that you essentially are alluding to, whereby you could allow for businesses to build their own blockchains using your service and using your protocol.
Yes, yes.
So is that something you're considering?
Our associate company, Unchain, they have been working on this blockchain, initially as a permission blockchain, I said. Later, Unchain set up this new company, Zilliqa, to focus on the public blockchain. But Unchain is still interested in deploying for private customers.
I see. So that's, just to clarify, sorry to interrupt, but is that called Unchain?
Unchain.
Okay.
ANQAN, Unchain.
Okay.
And then this is just one of the many companies that could use Zilliqa for private blockchain settings. Any other company can also potentially bring Zilliqa code and do their own customization and deploy for their respective customers. So it's just possible. At this stage, we are using a relatively restrictive license for our source code, but that's not our long-term intention. So we are very quickly switch to a much liberal license where people can use it for different purposes.
Fascinating. I genuinely mean that, because when I hear that there's a permissioned aspect, I do believe that also bodes well with the Generation 3 design. So and it also complements the fact that many of the successful blockchains right now do have a permission component. In that respect, we need to talk about two things. One of them is that in the research I've done studying Zilliqa, there's a statement being made by one of your colleagues that you are known as the Ferrari of blockchains. Can you tell us why? Why are you the Ferrari of blockchains?
That's an interesting analogy. I mean, it just means it's very fast. I mean, we have different analogies. Sometimes we say we are the highway, right? Because then if you have Ferrari, which is like a dApp, you need a highway to drive fast.
Okay.
So we just have different ways to put it.
Yes, and I think the highway is a good analogy. If we take it to Germany, for example, with a super fast highway, doesn't have the same limitations. That's probably a better analogy for what you represent. But let's also move across a little bit more to similar highways, let's say, in those analogy. We are now seeing the emergence of companies where they're alleging to have 1 million transactions per second capable on their blockchain, on-chain capable. So how do you address that, given that you have many times spoken about how you're not about competing, but you're about complementing blockchains? But the reality is you stand by the scalability of your company. How do you address this reality happening even inside China?
So my personal belief is that for a public blockchain with sufficient security and decentralization, we have to be a little more realistic. So something like 1 million transactions a second is not something we can achieve along our line in any time soon.
Right.
Because if you think about the public blockchain, generally you need to defend potential attacks, right? And then at the same time, you don't want single parties to make all the decisions. You need to run consensus among everyone, and then it's all about overhead.
Okay.
If you look at it from the performance perspective, but then if you do have a requirement of, let's say, 1 million transactions a second, and you do want to run it on a blockchain, it's doable. You can always have permission blockchain. You can customize it. You can make more assumptions. That's always something people can sort of work around.
Right.
But our objective is not to run 1 million transactions a second, unless our today's networking infrastructure is completely upgraded.
I see. So let's talk about the complementation. We're talking about complementing other blockchains, complementing the efforts of many different initiatives, including protocols, to become a robust system, even in China, let's say, as a platform. Tell us how you're planning on complementing different blockchains in the future. What's your vision there?
We want to complement other blockchains on two aspects. Number one is scalability and high throughput, and number two is security and verification.
Okay.
So if you look at this scalability, I think not all business applications running on blockchain would require such high throughput. So in that essence, we're not trying to sort of replicate an ecosystem as good as Ethereum, because it's already there and people are already benefiting from having Ethereum. Instead, what we're looking at is a smaller segment of the market where people want to run the apps on a blockchain, but somehow they are prevented from doing so because of the mismatch in terms of throughput. So like this mindshare collaboration is sort of to attempt to address part of the problem, where you have billions of ants shown every day at least, but Ethereum can only process around 1 million transactions a day.
That's fascinating.
Up to today. So that is a sort of the divide Zilliqa wants to address.
Okay.
But if one app only requires, let's say, one transaction 1 second, they do not have to move to Zilliqa, right? Just to be realistic. And then in terms of security and verification, we're working on a very cool new smart contract language framework. And then people can sort of write still in their familiar Solidity-like syntax. But then after that, it will be converted to a very formal language that is very easy to automatically verify security and correctness. So those are the two very interesting things we are working on. And of course, we have been speaking with different blockchains. And then I do think like it will be much more beneficial if different blockchain developers can talk with each other, and we think about what are the common problems ahead of us, and then we can join our hands to sort of tackle these common problems in a slightly longer term. That will definitely benefit each blockchain, in my understanding.
That's really interesting. So essentially, you're not about the overall scope of something as magnanimous as Ethereum. We've made that clear from your statement. But what I did want to sort of reiterate is that it doesn't by any means mean that you are small or you're niche focused, because there's a huge market in what you're doing. Let's talk about the industries that you've represented, because that's a platform for the future. In your enterprise experience through your private blockchain, what are some of those key industries that you focused on that are essentially really good examples of high throughput required usability and functionality and applicability? What businesses require a high throughput, and what experience have you had in those areas?
So number one is this digital advertising. I think I have already briefly discussed. So that's why we're working with Mindshare. And then, of course, if you look at other areas, some other emerging areas in terms of let's say rights management, they also have a potential of very high transactions. So we are not so specifically looking at specific sort of sectors, because I think it's all about volume.
But so respectfully, sorry to interrupt, but respectfully, Xinshu, you need to be. So if we're talking about business, obviously you need to be addressing specific targets. So in your experience and all the research of your team, what areas, what industries are you focused on, knowing that you're underpinned by a very outstanding high throughput capacity? Surely you must be specifically gearing it for an endpoint where you do have, a means to an end to essentially make money, to essentially interact in a business world. What are these industries you're focused on?
Yeah, again, I said we are very broad in terms of speaking with different industries and different sectors. Just to give some examples, like rights management,
Hmm.
and let's say fintech, of course,
Okay.
itself. We've been speaking with different players in the financial services industry, and then in terms of also things like shared economy.
Okay. That's
So,
interesting.
these are sort of some of the examples. Of course, gaming. More recently, it becomes more evident that you need a faster blockchain for
Well,
distributed gaming.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a huge industry, and
Yeah,
it cannot be overlooked because, again, if we're considering, the position of the investor, someone who's wanting to know more about Zilliqa, they're going to have to see the real world context. And these are the kinds of things we want to hear because clearly there's a massive industry for high throughput, in the real world. And it's good to hear some of those clear examples. If we could talk about Visa for a moment. And that's because
hmm
obviously in the centralized system, it's a real world thing. It requires approximately 8,000 transactions per second to be an efficient system on Visa. How far along
right.
the process are you right now with your numbers and stats?
I think we are still many months away from achieving that. So I mean, there are two main reasons. Number one is we have not achieved that level of scale per se in our testing, because that will require about 15,000 nodes at least.
Okay.
And we are just ramping up in terms of the number of nodes we have in our testnet.
Hmm.
Of course, with the help of releasing our testnet to the public, which is slated to be in Q1 this year,
Yes.
we may get more helping hands. So we'll get more nodes, so we can try like higher throughput testing. So that's one thing. Another thing is in terms of technology. So scaling up is our projection, but I think there are still many optimizations, testing, and feature implementation we need to do before we
Mm.
can hit that. So yeah, these are the two reasons we are still about a few months away from getting, let's say, 8,000 or 10,000 transactions per second.
But with all due respect, obviously that's a significant achievement already, though, because I've talked to many blockchains, and there are very few, if not, a handful, even less, that can even say that. Because to achieve 8,000 transactions per second and have that many nodes, my understanding is you're moving towards 2,000. What's the numbers like currently with your nodes?
So, I mean, our internal testing, it was
Hmm.
about 2,500 transactions per second with 3,600 nodes.
Okay. So,
So yeah, that's what we have now, and it's really a question of how many more technical challenges we have to overcome before we can support 15,000 nodes.
mhm.
That's the question.
And Xinshu, knowing all the knowledge you have about blockchain itself, is it fair to say that you are one of the world leaders in moving towards that achievement of achieving the scalability of Visa? I mean, surely you understand your competition enough to know that.
Yeah, of course, of course. Uh, you know, just that there are many ways to that.
Hmm.
We are going with this I would say, very conservative approach, which means we don't want to compromise anything on security. So we are going with the most conservative, known to be secure approaches, but we are still getting there.
Okay. Well, thank you for being so clear. And I do like the fact that you are not going to compromise the integrity of your system and the security particularly, and you've made that also clear just to have a fast blockchain.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the smart contracts. You have a very unique design with the sharding element of your smart contracts. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sharding is like we have a very good highway system. And then the next question is how do you run very fast? And then you build cars. You need to build cars in the way that these cars are sort of adapted to this new highway system, because the old cars may not run as fast as you would expect.
Right.
So that's why we are working on a new smart contract language. And that's just one of the reasons for having a new thing, because nobody likes, having a new language. There's just too much things to do.
Right.
And then you need to learn the new language. If you don't want to learn, then you need to provide a compiler for people to convert the program. So, one of the reasons, of course, is to leverage this sharded architecture to run very efficiently. And then the second reason is actually for security, because if you look at, the historic bugs and vulnerabilities we had on today's smart contract platform, it's not good. It's very negative, because people may not build up all the confidence they need to have to run smart contracts for their real businesses.
Hmm.
If your money can get locked up easily, That's a very negative sign. And we don't really have very formal and systematic ways to ensure that this problem will not come back again. So that's why we think one way out is to really have a very formal language that can provide very systematic way to sort of prove or guarantee that you don't have that kind of bugs,
Right.
and you have certain properties that will always hold for your program. So that's why we started work on this new smart contract language.
And Xinshu, what is that called, the name of the language that you've created? Does it have a name?
Yeah, it's called Zilla.
Okay, it's called Zilla. So in that respect,
Zilla,
is Zilla difficult to learn in comparison to Solidity, for example, from Ethereum?
Yeah, I don't expect people to learn. I think we will just provide a toolchain so
Okay.
people don't have to learn a new language. It's not just about new language, it's a whole new way of programming because it's very formal. It's called automata. It's like writing, some very low level descriptions of your states.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, so can you talk us through Toolchain? Because for those who may not know, how is that going to operate through the ecosystem, and how is that going to be easily accessible for those who may not be developers, for example? Do you need to be a developer to write a smart contract in your system?
Yeah, Toolchain I think is super important. I think this is one of the most important things for blockchain's future development. Aside from scalability, security, or interoperability. So I think what we imagine is in future people can write programs in a similar way like Solidity. Definitely not 100% the same, not 100% compatible, but similar. And then they just need to hit a button to sort of run a compiler. And then the compiler will convert their language into our Zilla representation. And then for some more sort of experienced programmers, they can also choose from some of these a list of proposed properties that they want to ensure. For example, if I'm receiving funds, I can say that I want to prove all the funds received into my smart contract will not be leaked. Things like that.
Right.
So in the beginning, it will be a little difficult, but I think over time we can provide more and more heuristics for people to sort of choose what are the properties you want to prove after they have written a language, they have written a smart contract.
Right.
And then we'll provide Toolchain to verify that yes, indeed, your program will guarantee this property, so you're good to go.
Okay.
So that's the scenario I'm imagining, having this year or early next year.
Well, let's move across now to a hot topic right now, which is AI. And the reason why I broach this is because we're hearing from many different blockchains that there are capacities even now for AI to integrate into smart contracts, to evolve the smart contract, to not require direct dev knowledge, not require for the even specific developing languages to be even relevant in the construction of a smart contract. So how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to integrate AI if you have a company, say, for example, on the side that maybe integrate and support Zilliqa? What are you thinking about that?
I think at the very high level, you think about the benefits of integrating AI onto blockchain. There are some aspects that are really interesting. So number one is this availability or accessibility of data. Because you have a blockchain, you already have, imagine blockchain really becomes dominant in terms of all sorts of business applications. You have lots of data there, and they are readily available. If you have proper information control and retrieval mechanisms, people can easily build it. AI apps on that. And the second part is something you have alluded to, which is the smart contracts can be smarter, right? So today's smart contracts, they are very smart, but they are as smart as the programmers can programming. But as you said, if AI can sort of automatically not just extract data and do the analysis, but can also automatically analyze smart contracts and then construct some simple smart contracts autonomously. So that would be something really interesting. So to this respect, I think Zilliqa has an interesting feature in terms of ensuring the correctness and security. Because over time, you need to get more and more serious about whether my smart contracts are indeed correct. Are they doing the things I want them to be? And whether they have no, at least major security vulnerabilities. Otherwise, all my assets will be under threat.
I see.
So these are the, issues that Zilliqa can come and help. And there's also another aspect, which is depending on the, how critical your computation is. when you're running these AI applications. Sometimes you need higher assurance, higher precision. Sometimes, for some computation, maybe it's okay because it's not very essential. And then with Zilliqa's blockchain and smart contracts, we can allow the programmers or the users to say how accurate I want the result to be, or how much assurance I want it to be. Accordingly, of course, if you want higher assurance, you need to pay more gas fee. But we will get more redundant computing for you.
Right, but just moving again back to the question about the AI, are you considering partnerships in the future? Because you're going to need to be competitive in that space, there's no question, because we are moving more towards that direction. And also, is Zilliqa designed in such a way where it can easily integrate partnerships?
I think that's not a question, as you say, right? AI is very important, and it's just getting more important. So Zilliqa will be happy to explore which AI partners we can work together with. If they also have a vision on blockchain, we'll be very happy to be their platform supporter in that case.
Interesting. If we could talk about dApps now, because as we started with the conversation, very importantly, you are a platform. You are going to be facilitating potentially infinite number of dApps. Let's see how that unfolds. Let's talk about the examples already and the readiness of the blockchain. What dApps are you considering? What have you considered? What have you had in your enterprise space as examples of dApp, design?
I think there are several interesting applications we are looking at at this moment. So the mindshare thing is number one, and then previously worked on securities trading. And then there you also have some interesting use cases in terms of having a marketplace people can trade without having to reveal their identities. So that's another example. And then I think rights management is also very important because it just digitizes everything, and blockchain is an ideal platform because you have different parties without mutual trust.
Right.
Necessary always the case. And then shared economy. I think nowadays people are generally using centralized systems, but it'll be also very interesting to experiment with a distributed system. So these are areas that we are looking at. Of course, we are also trying to speak with different potential partners. It's just like we don't have very firm information to share at this moment in terms of who are we working with.
I see. So essentially, you're saying that you do have an idea of some partners, you just can't disclose them at the moment.
And sometimes they are not partnerships yet. We're exploring that.
Okay, let's talk about banks. Are you considering, given that you are trying to be a highly scalable solution, whenever you have high scalability, you have the ability for a finance to be a real factor, a real industry on the blockchain, because it specifically requires high scalability. So are you considering banking and financial institutions specifically geared, for money exchange, at that kind of level and that kind of degree?
So Zilliqa is basically a technical solution, right? So basically, we of course have spoken with some very big banks in terms of how our blockchain technology or solution can help with their transactions. And then there's also another aspect, which is payments.
Right.
Right. So it's not necessarily banking, but payment is also a very important aspect. And that's sort of our approach. So basically, we try to speak with our potential partners to see whether we can provide the necessary platform and solutions for them to revolutionize. But on the other hand, of course, we don't have any immediate plan to become, let's say, a bank ourselves, or try to compete with the bank with something like that.
Right.
So that's not our objective.
So how many of you, because we're going to talk about team in a moment, but how successful have you been in trying to have these discussions? Because obviously it's a very competitive market and many people are trying to establish contracts. How successful have you been in your experience, even when you were talking about being that closed blockchain, that permission blockchain initially?
Yeah, I think we were pretty successful when we were doing the permission blockchain. We had interesting trials and deployments. Of course, as a new public blockchain, the code base is still a work in progress. We just rolled out our source code, I think, early Jan.
Right.
We are going to roll out more testnet one by one, and then when it becomes more mature, we'll do a mainnet launch. So at this stage, we're still trying to explore who could be our potential partners. For some of the partners who are really keen, we have already started joint projects. But again, that will be on testnet.
I see. And we're going
And
to be
for, I guess, yeah, for most of the partners, they will also wait a little while before we have a more mature testnet with all these API documentation so that they can build on top of that.
right. Well, let's move there. Let's talk about the roadmap itself. In that you talked about the testnet. That's my understanding. That was December. That was planned for. Moving across to the mainnet. So in that context, are you expecting to have several dApps evolve post mainnet release, or will you have some examples of some dApps that evolve prior to that post?
So, at this stage, we are looking at rolling out at least 2 versions of our testnet in the first half of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then if everything works well, we will move to mainnet. So that's later 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of 2018, we hope we can roll out 2 to 3 sort of anchor applications on Zilliqa. Those anchor applications will be the apps which really require high throughput. We'll show how they can be run on Zilliqa. Okay. And this is the main line. Of course, in the meanwhile, we'll work on our smart contract layer. We'll have alpha version maybe in Q2.
Right. So considering so much is happening this year, essentially, let's talk about the beginnings with the ICO, with the process of tokenizing the system and allowing people access. Let's talk through those dates. And in let's say even in the next the next 2 quarters, what's likely to unfold? How do people access Zilliqa?
How do people access Zilliqa?
Yes, in terms of its
tokens.
Yes.
Our sort of this token generation event has already come to the end. So for people to sort of access our tokens, they can wait for the secondary market.
Okay, can you talk about what that means? So that's the obviously secondary market when the exchange is available to them? Is that what you're alluding to?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So when's that likely to unfold?
I think very soon some exchanges may start to list us. Of course, again, that's not at my discretion.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's also important for the listeners to know is that once you have finalized your first preliminary phase, it is up to the discretion of the exchanges. Many people don't understand that, but you essentially are waiting for that time. So is it fair to say you don't know the exact date?
Yeah, I don't know yet until it happens. And if you understand, exchanges have their own reasons not to announce things, beforehand.
Have you got any hints for us about exchange release in terms of which one?
I don't have something to share at this moment.
Okay, no, that's understandable. All right, so you've talked about some examples of the shared economy. What about supply chains as another example? I was reading through some examples of how Zilliqa could fit. Do you think that supply chains are a good example?
It can be potentially supply chain. We spoke with some people. We have some initial ideas, but that's still at very early stage. So I hope I can have more very concrete use cases to share after, let's say, 2 months.
Okay. Finally, I mean, if we could just talk about your vision. Now, it's been such an interesting conversation. I do thank you for your time, but I always enjoy listening to the plan of the CEO. Clearly, you've had one for some time. If we take you ahead a few years, what is the vision, for this time in the interim, and what do you plan on achieving?
That depends on the timeline. If you are talking about 6 months, my whole focus is to roll out the mainnet. But if you allow me slightly more time, let's say 2 to 3 years from now, I want to see a platform where people will go to for specific reasons. It's not like the overall platform like you whenever you build an app, you will go to that. It's when you want to build a very secure and decentralized app. When you think that you need to have very high throughput, you go to Zilliqa. Mm-hmm. And after you go to Zilliqa, Zilliqa will take care of many of the things. So for instance, you can just write your smart contract in a very high level way. And then we'll have Toolchain where we'll convert. We have Toolchain to help guarantee that, okay, yes, what you have written is largely what you have thought about. And it's largely what you want to have a guarantee on. And then after that, we will just start running that. And we also want this platform to give users a little more friendliness. So users don't have to worry so much about, let's say, very high gas fee. Mm-hmm. And then they don't have to worry about whether my transaction will get into the next block or after 10 blocks. So that's, sort of the things I want to have on this go-to platform.
Right, and to achieve that, clearly you need to have a team beside you. We haven't addressed that, so I need to quickly do that before we finish. How confident are you in the team, and how big is the team that you currently have, and what experience have they got?
The team is currently very small, I would say, for such an amazing project. We have about less than 10 people, and the tech team is about 5 people, and the rest are doing all sorts of other important tasks. So we have very strong tech team from the academia. We have people who are in the venture capital field. We have people who have built several tech companies. So it's a really very dynamic team of different expertise. I'm very confident with this team. I think this is definitely the best team I could ever imagine. But on the other hand, we have to expand. We
Yes,
have to
and let's address
scale
that.
up.
That's essential. We address that now. In your design, in the architecture of your overall token structure, have you assigned money available for these kinds of things, for investing in the actual infrastructure itself? Obviously, right down to the crux of paying more employees, because obviously there are many foundations established inside the architecture of many of these blockchains. So have you designed an amount of that allocated for specifically the company to build out its own technology via more brilliant minds that apply to the vision that you have?
So
Is there a plan?
there are two parts to it. So I think number one, the most of our budget will be allocated to sort of getting the best minds, and we have budget for developers. So basically, they will deliver the most robust and secure code, and then we also have almost an equal amount of budget for researchers, because sometimes people just underestimate a little bit, on the challenges we have, or the challenges any blockchain platform we have.
Okay.
So, we have budget for that, to getting researchers work on slightly mid to long term challenging problems. And then, that's the majority of our budget. And of course, we also have some other incentive mechanisms in place in terms of our tokens, right? So you basically grow with the company.
Thank you for explaining that, because I think it's important, obviously, to have some sort of allocation for future building, and that's essentially what you've explained there. So just finally, Xinshu, what would you like to say on behalf of Zilliqa to everyone? You've made it clear about your vision, you've made it clear about pretty much everything that's the fundamentals. But if someone's considering looking into it further, what would you like to say in terms of access? How can people learn more about Zilliqa?
So, number one, I really want to say thank you to our conversation today, and I want to thank all our community. Sometimes, if you look at our community, we're a little special. Basically, we build it out very organically. People do have very genuine interest, and then every day there's still good conversation. And in terms of accessing more materials, if you go to our website, Zilliqa.com, we have several documents lined up there. Some are more technical, some are slightly higher level.
Okay.
I think they are the good starting point.
Right. And what about social media? If we want to learn more about it, in today's very, tech savvy world, how could we? Is there any platforms? Obviously, YouTube's one.
In terms of learning Zilliqa or
That's
learning
right.
blockchain in general?
Oh, to interact with Zilliqa, to be involved.
I think the best channel would be our Slack channel. If you have many technical thoughts or questions,
Sure.
so just
Okay.
go there and discuss with us.
Thank you very much. And obviously, there's a Telegram as well, I think. Is that correct?
Yes, and if you have more general questions, go to our Telegram.
Right. Well, on behalf of all the listeners who are fascinated by your very interesting scaling solution, we thank you sincerely for your time. We understand as a CEO you're very busy. So Xinshu Dong, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you in the future, and I'll be following along as you become, no doubt, an exciting blockchain, not just for now, but the future of the world.
Thank you, Brad. It was a very nice conversation.
Thank you.